Hi there, my name's Jess Hufton. I'm a vocalist and broadcaster from Scotland. The music and entertainment industry is everything to me. I've been a part of some incredible projects, playing alongside some of the country's finest musicians. My career was a dream come true. Well, that was until COVID-19 came along and turned my world upside down. So I've gone from a professional musician to a cleaner in a nursing home. When the COVID-19 pandemic forced a nationwide lockdown in March 2020, music studios and venues had to close their doors and musicians were rendered jobless. Even with schemes aimed at helping musicians through this difficult time, it still wasn't enough. Performers had to get creative, and they turned to the internet and new technology in order to continue their work. How are musicians adapting to this new world, and how is this changing the industry as we know it? Compared to 50 years ago, the music recording industry has become unrecognisable. Recording technology that was once confined to the world of professional audio engineers can now be found in the bedrooms of most modern-day musicians. Combine that with a nationwide lockdown, and we have an instance of more musicians than ever setting up their own home recording studios. But what is this new technology really doing, and how is it affecting the future of the music recording business? To find out more about this, I visited La Chunky Recording Studio in Glasgow to speak with audio engineer Ronan Breslin about his experience throughout this ordeal. So I just want to talk a little bit about the technology involved in recording music. Could you give me a quick kind of overview as to how music recording equipment has changed over the past 50 years or so?
Well, up until probably the early 90s, recording was done to multi-track tape. There were some sort of digital tape recordings as well. So recorded to multi-track tape, and what you had was a situation where going to a recording studio was quite an expensive affair, especially if you wanted to go to a top-end recording studio with the best equipment. And so from, say, probably the tipping point is, the millennium, 2000, 2001, where lots of studios shifted way over to computer-based recordings and digital audio workstations. And what that also resulted in is a bit of more of a democratization of sound recording. Because what you could do is you could afford to buy a computer, you could afford to buy, say, a multi-input sound card and a fast hard drive. It's still quite expensive. You'd have to spend a few thousand to get set up to do that from the home or from a small project studio. However, and if you compare this to the cost of, say, a proper professional 2-inch that's 2-inch wide tape machine, multi-track tape machine, which would have been maybe 40 or 50,000 pounds to purchase, and then the accompanying desk, etc. I mean, studios were big investments in those days. So the fact that the technology became cheaper and became more, focused on just having a computer and some, a couple of decent microphones, an interface, you could start doing work at home. So democratise things, and we started to get in that period during the noughties, people having hits that were recorded in the bedrooms.
So given that COVID-19 has seen musicians build their own recording studios from home because technology, as you said, is much cheaper and more accessible, does that concern you as a music producer?
This has been going on not just because of COVID, but COVID has accelerated it, definitely. People setting up, musicians in particular, setting up their home recording systems. But even before that, there's many musicians who will have a home studio to work in. And they do that to record demos and sometimes fully fledged tracks. Like I said, COVID accelerated that, and I have a friend who works in a music shop who said to me that their mail order went through the roof for recording equipment when COVID kicked in. And yeah, you could be worried about it, but what you should also see it as an opportunity, because you'll get musicians getting the recording bug, doing it themselves at home, but then realising, my tunes still don't sound like they do on the radio, or they just don't, they're just not as good sounding as a kind of commercial release. And so what you might get is the situation where they'll say, I'm going to go to a studio and re-record some of the bits, and I'm going to get someone else to help me doing that, and hopefully I'll get it sounding more radio friendly or more commercial.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, the massive increase in COVID became in of musicians getting into home recording can only actually hopefully act as a feeder to studios like ourselves.
Now, as if lockdown wasn't hard enough on recording studios such as these, musicians have been using this downtime to establish their own home recording setup. This has been enabled by technology becoming far more cheaper, smaller and readily available, essentially turning technology like this into something a little more like this. What this means for the future of recording studios, who knows? But the question is, can we really go back? And to an extent, why would we want to go back? After speaking with Ronan, I realised that where the pandemic has had very obvious negative side effects, it does carry with it some positives. Advancing technology has generated a democratised recording industry. Musicians could now be more likely to visit a professional recording studio. With the DIY musician business model on the rise, musicians are also becoming more experimental and much more collaborative. This here is Andy Turnan, also known as Beta Hawk, an 80s synthwave guitarist and recording artist. Now, Andy lives over 300 miles away from me in Birmingham. He reached out to me during lockdown after he discovered one of my music covers on social media. I agreed to collaborate with him by writing and recording vocals for him from my home studio. As a result, we now have interest from a record label all the way over in Canada. Not only has COVID-19 encouraged people to set up their own recording spaces, but it's now giving birth to new creative projects that are no longer constrained by geographical boundaries. The pandemic has robbed me of most of my work, but in a way, it's kind of been good for me. Jamie Clark is an independent recording artist and music teacher, and just like me, he used lockdown as the perfect means to get creative. He even completed his second self-recorded album, Band of Brothers. So do you think you would be where you're at just now with your album, had COVID not happened?
Really good point. I'd have got there, but maybe it made the process quicker.
So do you think there's benefits there? I know it's very easy to say, oh, it's really doom and gloom, musicians have lost their gigs, lost their money. So do you think there's actually maybe a kind of creative benefit to the lockdown?
Certainly, I think being locked up, metaphorically, depends on your character. For me, I think that made me look deeper into myself and made writing songs or your targets, making sure that you reach your targets. Like, I'm going to finish that song and I can do that or that part, or record that, or sing that note, I want to hit that B flat, blah blah. So I think there's quite a bit of that in there.
Yeah, totally. And like you said, like you're collaborating with someone now as well, and that's the first time you've ever done that. So do you think that would have happened?
I mean, this is a pal that I've not saw for 20 years. Maybe sitting every night with our phones made people kind of contact people you wouldn't normally speak to, which is, in my case, a good thing. So getting a hold of him has been cool. It's looking good for next year, but I just hope that things do change and I get the chance to do some different stuff.
So you touched on people being on their phones a little bit more. Can you think of any other ways technology's maybe helped musicians in this situation?
The whole online music thing, wow. So, I mean, when I'm teaching, people are, so I'm broadcasting the cam, I'm sharing the screen and they're seeing my session. The other night I'm writing a Christmas song with a wee guy, and it needed a piano solo, but he couldn't think it, so I quickly recorded it, sent it in the chat, he imported it, and within 10 minutes he had the solo. I was like, that's amazing.
So do you think this is going to change the industry in any way permanently after this?
Do you know, I was speaking to my pal yesterday. He had, before any of this was happening, he saw music by people not being at their gigs, but broadcasting it, and I could see that happening.
As Jamie said, creatively speaking, lockdown has had its perks, and musicians are feeling their need to play live by taking to the stage online. But how do we take likes and turn them into money? Take a look at this man here. His name is George Peeling. Before COVID-19 swooped in and made a mess of things, George would tour the UK with his father as part of his country rock duo Texas Gun, selling out and making an absolute killing. Despite losing all of his work, George refused to call it a day and used his home recording setup, along with social media, to continue making music by collaborating with all of his musical friends online. He called these videos the Lockdown Sessions, and every single day of lockdown he released a brand new cover song featuring new musicians. Not only would he grace people's timelines with some fantastic music, but his well wishes and daily updates grew him a devoted fan base. Viewers weren't just in love with George's music, but they loved him too.
You fancy one, Lynette? Go on, sing it for me.
We're free, and I'm ready, so we can go steady. How's about saving all your time for me?
Sure thing. Woo!
Well, no more looking. I know I've been taken. How's about keeping steady company? Go on, George.
Got a heart for that.
His covers became such a hit on social media that people began requesting his music for their own use. George took it upon himself to press his own CDs and DVDs and sell them to all of his adoring fans. Where this has not quite filled the hole in his performing life, nor is it completely financially bulletproof, George Peeling is the perfect example of a musician finding opportunity within the adversity by using technology and social media to his advantage. Where the internet is offering us creative types endless opportunities and is giving us some scope to perform live, there is one area this could prove to be incredibly damaging.
Who'd have thought it, George?
Live music is at the heart of Scotland's music industry. From our Scottish youth orchestras to our newest up-and-coming rock bands, playing live is the only real way for musicians to engage with their fans and hone their craft. Our live music industry has seen the birth of the country's top musicians, including Calvin Harris, Emily Sandé, and of course the Proclaimers. Scotland's array of live music venues offers every musician of every genre a place to play and make money. And let's not forget, our music lovers are spoilt for choice when it comes to live music festivals. Every summer, concert goers from up and down the UK flock to Scotland to enjoy our award-winning music festivals. Eden, Transmit, Buttefest, the list goes on. No wonder industry professionals have identified Scotland as one of the key areas of growth for music tourism. With the pandemic showing no signs of slowing down, it's difficult to tell what the future may hold for the live music industry. Who or what is going to rescue this vital part of our creative economy? Lockdown has had a devastating impact on music venues, just like this one right here behind me. With the cancellation of live performances, not to mention the ban on alcohol sales, they have been forced to close their doors. Now, as we've already seen, musicians are embracing certain elements of the industry going digital. However, there are a population of performers who are condemning the idea of live music going online. Back in the 1980s, Ian Donaldson was a hit-making Scottish pop star. His band H2O shot to fame after earning themselves 2 UK top 40 hits in 1983. H2O burned bright, but sadly not for very long, disbanding only 2 years later in 1985. Still to this day though, Ian continues to write and record music and is still selling out venues across the country. He's a seasoned and professional performer who's concerned about the idea of streamed gigs becoming common practice.
I think there's no comparison. I think you've got to realise that first of all. And I decided not to do anything on social media, doing things live. I was asked to do contribute to the Frontline Festival. And they asked me if I wanted to do it acoustically. And I had the same thing. I said I'd rather not do it rather than do it acoustically because I don't think that's what I'm about and what people would want. So fortunately they agreed to allow the whole band and we did 5 songs, and it was a brilliant moment because nobody had kicked a ball musically for like the best part of the year, and it was total euphoria. And I hope that comes across when people see it on Monday. But that was a magic moment. So it's a bit like, music. Human beings are a bit like water. They do find a way. They do find a way through. Biggest mountain, hardest rock. People will. That's why we're still here after all these hundreds of thousands of years, because we've got a spirit,
So you don't think then that streaming gigs could ever possibly replace live music?
By its sheer definition, it can't. It just can't. It doesn't matter if you've got surround sound, the neighbours in, looking through your windows. It will never replace standing. If it's the tiniest gig with the newest band who can hardly play, that to me, that's still more of a shot in the arm than it is watching things on TV. There's a time and a place for TV, but and some people don't want to go to live gigs. They're strange people, in my opinion. Okay, they are the unusual in the world, and their lives would be really enriched and fulfilled if they would just go out and see a band. But no, you can't replace it. It's impossible. It's impossible. If that sounds old school, that sounds old school. That's okay.
So what do you think then is the importance of live music to both artists and audiences? Why does it hold such a special place for everyone?
It's community, and it's communal, it's spiritual, it's everything that you don't have to use verbal language for. Everything, you name it, it goes from your heart to my heart, your soul to my soul, and you don't need words to describe it. It's all magic. I think it's magic. And the practical side of that really is that musicians couldn't earn a living anymore. Theatres couldn't earn a living, ticket printers, all millions of people were left without income. So that was the downside of it as well. And I think that we realised just how much we need music in our lives. Live music is, any kind of music. When anybody tried to do a show, even if it was like 2 people and a dog were invited, there was hallelujah, hallelujah. It was one of those moments for people, thinking, yeah, I would travel, I would swim the Atlantic, I'd swim the Pacific just to get a taste of that. I'll stand at the door and kick in. I don't mind as long as I'm involved. So I think we realised just how important it really was. And the government didn't understand any of that. They didn't realise how important it was, and they've treated us really badly overall, I think. So a lot of things happened. It was the pebble in the pool, it was the ripples kept on going, affecting people, affecting things, and the ripples are still going, It's a really difficult time. Mm-hmm.
It's quite clear then that streaming your performances is not going to replace the thrill of playing a live gig, nor is it yet offering a sustainable means of musicians making money. Ian's also touched on the idea that the government are not doing enough to look after the UK's creative population. In July 2020, the UK government announced a £1.57 billion care package to protect the future of British museums, venues and theatres. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, "This money will help safeguard the sector for future generations, ensuring that arts groups and venues across the UK can stay afloat and support their staff whilst their doors remain closed and curtains remain down." So let's take a closer look. England received a £1.4 billion cut of this money, offering their creative population a mix of grants, repayable loans and funds to protect English heritage. This accounts for around 88% of the entire care package. The devolved nations received a total of £188 million, with Scotland being issued £97 million. This is around 6% of the total funds available. The £97 million boost received by Holyrood has now been allocated to a variety of organisations, including PRS for Music, the Musicians' Union and the Music Venue Trust. However, the large discrepancy in the distribution of this money has not went unnoticed. Industry figures such as Scottish comedian Mark Nelson said that this sum is an afterthought and that £97 million does not come close to what is needed. And he has got a point. £97 million is never going to cover an industry that generates over £453 million per year. But given Scotland's position as a devolved nation and our contribution to the music industry, it is in fact a fair percentage. I asked the Scottish Government about what extra provisions they've put into place to protect Scotland's music industry. They issued me the following statement. The Scottish Government understands how hard the music industry has been hit by the pandemic. We acted quickly to support grassroots music venues, providing £2.2 million to 68 venues across Scotland through our Grassroots Music Venues Stabilisation Fund. We have recently announced a further round of this fund worth £4 million. We've also supported those who work in the music industry through our Creative Freelancers Hardship Fund. This funding will help people remain in the industry so that their expertise and experience is not lost. The Scottish Government has now allocated more than £120 million of additional funding to support culture and heritage since the start of the pandemic. We will continue to listen to the needs of the sector and do everything within our power to support them through this crisis. The Scottish Government have offered every lifeline they can in order to protect this industry, especially the self-employed. Around 72% of working musicians are self-employed, and apart from one-off grants offered by the Scottish Government, have been left to rely on a badly targeted freelancer furlough scheme. In March 2020, Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak launched a £12 billion self-employment income support scheme. It has since faced massive backlash from the self-employed after it handed £1.3 billion to workers who sought no loss of income, giving nothing to 500,000 people who were left without work. To make matters worse, during a controversial interview with ITV News in September 2020, Rishi Sunak said, "I can't pretend that everyone can do exactly the same job that they were doing at the beginning of this crisis. That's why we've put a lot of our extra resource into trying to create new opportunities for people." In a comment that has undermined the work of the government, musicians and creatives across the country are rejecting this go-get-a-new-job mentality and are urging the Chancellor to instead fix his broken scheme. The Music Venue Trust is a UK charity aimed at helping our grassroots music venues. They've been working closely with the Scottish Government to help prevent the closure of our key music venues.
Music Venue Trust's mission is to make sure that music venues survive generally, and most specifically through this pandemic. So Scottish Government has rather brilliantly engaged right from the start with Music Venue Trust and tried to find out what it is that music venues need in order to be able to survive. And then to the extent that they can, they've made huge efforts to underwrite that and make sure that music venues do get through this. Thus far, we've seen zero closures of grassroots music venues down to the pandemic, which we think within the Music Venues Alliance network is a real success.
So I just want to touch on a little bit of the importance to our culture that live music venues have. Why are live music venues so important to Scottish culture, for example?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for all live music venues, but I can definitely talk about the grassroots section. And by that, I mean the Music Venue Trust describes grassroots music venues as being the research and development hubs of the UK music industry. Now, the UK music industry is worth £5.8 billion in 2019. It's the recent report that we have from UK Music. And what that says is that we've got this enormous sector that begins its life in tiny venues. And when you lose the tiny venues, you don't then get to have those festival headliners. You don't get bands learning their craft, then later on getting record deals, etc. So it's really important that there's this opportunity that's available to any emerging musicians to be able to perform and to really get good. So grassroots music venues are there for that purpose.
So what advice would you give then to Scottish musicians that are out there, or musicians, venues, roadies, anyone in the creative sector? What advice would you give them if they're not able to secure the funds that they should be entitled to? What advice would you give them to help them perhaps just continue making their living?
I mean, that's a super tricky question because you're asking me to work out other people's finances for them, how that would happen. And I'm certainly not going to say musicians, roadies, etc. should retrain. That figure I gave earlier about £5.8 billion value for the music industry in the UK last year. Music is hugely important for the UK's soft power and what it means, and actually for Scotland's soft power as well, and how we're seen abroad. And so what I wanted to really point out is that one of the things the UK is genuinely world leading at, world beating, we're best in class, is actually music, arts and culture. And if the UK government isn't funding that properly, then that's going to drift. So when there's an inference from, say, Rishi Sunak that people should retrain, I think nothing could be more valuable to the UK, especially going forward, especially in Brexit land, especially leaving the EU, about showing how important it is that UK is world beating, is to fund the parts of the economy in which the UK is exactly that. And that, to my mind, is music.
According to Nick, it's not just musicians depending on the survival of the music industry, but the UK economy is also heavily reliant on our thriving £5.8 billion industry. Not just financially, but also in the sense of maintaining our world-famous identity. Rohan Babulal is a professional performer in a number of high-end function bands. He was lucky enough to receive furlough from the SEISS, but he still believes more needs to be done. Like Nick, Rohan thinks the government needs to up its game in terms of funding our arts industry, especially post-Brexit.
I mean, it's all very well helping individual people, which, you know, to some extent they are doing, right? You can't really knock them particularly for that. They are helping people, although I'm aware that some people don't get the kind of help they might need, but it is being provided to some extent. The big issue I have with the way the government has handled this is that they may have looked after individual people, but the actual entity, which is, you know, the industry, music industry and the arts in general, I think they've just left it to rot, and they've completely ignored the resonance that has in our culture. All of the stuff that we're known for in Britain is famous the world over for its musical heritage. They have not shown any care or consideration towards the music industry or the arts in general. And that's a huge problem, because I think the music industry in particular, it has been in a stagnation period for some time now anyway. It's something that, you know, it's not surviving and blossoming as well as it could be anyway, even in good times. So to just ignore it in the way that they have done, I think is terrible. You need more help for music venues and your theatres, that type of thing. We really need a lot more of that kind of stuff, because if you don't have this stuff, what you've got is a sort of cultural wasteland. I mean, maybe that's a strong opinion, but that's what I think. Over time, you'll have a cultural wasteland, and all you'll have is stuff that's imported from outside and not your own homegrown talent, which I think is really important.
It goes without saying that COVID-19 has shook the entire music industry to its core. Many musicians have found opportunity within the adversity and have utilised new technology to maintain their creative pursuits. And so far, Scotland has managed to avoid permanent venue closures. However, it cannot be denied that the government needs to step it up a gear and not make the mistake of overlooking this critical part of the UK's economy, especially with brand new battles looming ahead. In order to avoid mass unemployment and cultural destruction, more state funding will be required, especially if we want to remain on top. That being said, even with the industry becoming an isolated and distanced entity, musicians and creatives are pulling together now more than ever to fight back. Our careers are viable, and we are valid.
My name is Roland Bresman, and I'm a studio engineer and music producer, and I am valid.
I am June Clark. I am a musician, and I am valid.
I am Ian Donaldson. I'm a musician, singer-songwriter, and I am valid.
My name is Jamie Campbell. I'm a musician, and I am valid.
My name is Lauren Gilmore. I'm a songwriter and producer, and I am valid.
My name's Rory. I'm a musician, and I'm valid.
I'm Caroline McGregor. I'm a sound engineer, and I'm valid.
My name's Kenny Tom. I'm a musician, songwriter, and I'm valid.
I'm Darren McMilland. I'm a professional guitarist, and I'm valid.
My name is Hayley McDowell. I'm a cosplayer, and I am valid.
My name is John Davidson. I am a singer-songwriter, and I am valid.
My name is Jess Hufton. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I am valid.